Hey everybody, Japheth here, and today we're going to be talking about progs. This is a video that I've been meaning to do for a long time, and it is probably a very critical one because progs are an important topic when using FutureMUD. They just cut across so many areas of the engine. It's almost unavoidable that you need to become a little bit of a progger, but the good news is they're actually not as scary as they might seem on the outset, and I've been doing a lot recently to try and make them easier to use, self-documenting, and this video should hopefully round that out by introducing you all to the concepts and show you a few examples and just get an idea of where to start, I suppose. So starting with the big concepts, what even are progs? Most of you have probably heard of them if you've been around MUDs for any length of time or any games really. You might otherwise hear them referred to as scripts in a lot of other engines. What they basically are is little snippets of custom code that can run, and in the case of FutureMUD, they can also return a value, so they can be useful for parts of the engine that need to find something. So if you are a person who is at all familiar with computer programming, you probably don't need as much conceptual help at the start here as anybody else, and you're welcome to skip forward on the chapters. But basically the problem I was trying to solve with the progging system that we have in FutureMUD is early on, I was trying to make a very customizable engine. So we would start doing some system would need to go, items, and you might say, okay, well, this item might need to consider, the race of a person or the gender of a person or the weather or something like that. And I found myself having to repeat over and over again all these conditions on each of the things that I was building, and I could see that there was a problem. There should be a way to have arbitrarily complex logic that is consistent across everything. So, I can't, as the coder, anticipate everything you might want to do with your MUD. This is the kind of area where you often, in most other MUDs, won't be able to do something in-game, so you'll have to hop into the code and create a different coded way to do things. So I'm trying to avoid having lots and lots of different branches of FutureMUD so that it's quality controlled, centralized, and you also don't need to be a coder to do it. But there is still a need to give you guys some ability to affect these things. So progs are basically something where you can optionally pass in some parameters, and you can do some stuff, and then you can optionally return a value. So let's go over some very simple examples. Everything to do with the prog functionality is done with the prog command, as is pretty usual with FutureMUD. But what we're going to do is we're going to show one of the simplest progs. The engine uses this very extensively internally. The prog is called always true. Always true. It returns a Boolean, which means true or false. And as it says here, it accepts any parameters. So you can call this prog always true, pass it any parameters that you want, and it will give you back the value of true. Why would you want to do that? Well, let's take an example from real building. So let's say race show 1. Maybe I should have chosen something a little bit simpler, but one of the things for races says, can you select this race in character creation? This humanoid race is just the base race for everything else, so we don't want people selecting it. So I've got a prog there that says always false, which is the opposite version of always true, obviously. It just gives you false every time. So when the MUD is considering which races to display, for this one, it's telling it false, don't display it. But you might want to have a little bit more complicated logic than that. You might want to consider role play points, or you might want to consider some other option that they've chosen, like if you're doing a roll first rather than a race first setup for Jargon, you might have had them select their class and then you only want to show them races that can be the class that they've selected. Some other examples. I only have always true ones. Oh yes, I'm not on LabMUD. That's what I was going to show. So on LabMUD, I have an admin race, which has an availability prog, which is admin avatar selection. So this was the way that on LabMUD I used to get people to make an admin. I wanted them to be a separate race. I no longer think that's the way to do it, but that's the way I used to set it up. But I had a thing called an admin creation token, which is effectively in the same category of things as role play points, karma, build points, etc. I would award it to the account when somebody made an admin account, and then this option would unlock for them in character creation. So it would only appear in the list if this was true. If the resource on the character, which is passed in as a parameter, is one or more. So that's what progs are for. Well, that's one of the things that progs are for. They're there to provide you guys the ability to customize things. They can be really simple. So we've already talked about always true and always false. A slightly more complex example might be something like is admin. So this is used to check that somebody is an admin. If, things like help files that should only be showed to admins, or functionality that they should only be able to access if they are an admin. It's a very simple prog, but it has some logic in there. And we can use this in the MUD in different places to customize the experience. So going back over here, one of the things to note about the prog system, and one of the reasons why I was happy to have it be used in such a fundamental way in the engine, is that they are compiled. So as it says here, strongly typed and compiled. So the engine checks ahead of time whether a prog is valid. If you enter a prog and it's not valid, it'll tell you that it's not valid. And because it's compiled, it's much faster to run because it's not having to pass the whole prog from text every time. It sort of sets up a fast execution path. So these things are lightning fast. They're only a little bit slower than real code, which is pretty good for a scripting language. They'll check your syntax and tell you where your syntax is wrong, and that's all very good. So the way that you interact with progs, I know we already covered that. So like most things, you've got some very familiar looking building commands like listing things, showing things, beginning to edit it, making new ones, etc. And set. You should be familiar by now after this series of videos that this is the format in which I lay out all my building commands. So generally the format is, what you'll do is you'll use one of these two commands to create a new one. If you just want to make a blank one, do this version. We'll talk about why you would do this version a bit later in the video, but actually quite often you'll find yourself using this second version. You can also manually execute a prog, and that can be useful sometimes. Like just to give you an example, we can run the always true prog. We don't have to supply any parameters, and it tells you that it returned true. And what if we'll give it a parameter? We'll add me as a character in there, it's still true. If we look at the list of progs, and there's a lot of them, I'll show you some ways to filter them. There's a few ones here at the top that are used for a lot of boilerplate. Always 0, always 1, always 100, etc. These kind of things tend to be used in currency divisions and that kind of stuff. And just a few random places where I need a default fallback value. So that's why I create them with the seeder. You will less often use a lot of this stuff. But let's say show prog 9. So this is a simple one that is just taking a number and telling you whether it is greater than 1. So if we prog execute is greater than 1, we'll pass in 1, it'll tell us that it's not greater than 1. But if we pass in 2, it tells us that it is greater than 1. So you can kind of see what's happening here. Those are the basics. I'm going to spend less time going through the building commands and doing things like editing, etc., because that's not the exciting thing about progs. The exciting thing is going over the concepts of what everything means. So I'll start by talking about variables. So inside a prog, there are a number of variables that store information. The variables themselves, the parameters are variables. So when you create this prog, there's already a variable called number that is of type number, so it is storing a number. And you can refer to it inside the prog by using the @ symbol and the name of the variable. So you can declare new variables, you can set the values of them, you can even override the values of the parameters if you want to. They're not read-only or anything like that. If you know what you're talking about with programming, variables should make sense. There's a scope to variables where they apply. Like, for example, if you create a loop or something and you declare a variable inside the loop, it doesn't exist outside the loop. This probably means more to you again if you are a programmer, but just important to know if you're doing some of the more advanced stuff. You can also invoke other progs from within progs. I'm going to give you a quick preview at something we're going to cover in more detail later. But this subway wrapper prog here, subway wrapper, executes another prog called subway heartbeat and passes in a parameter of 1. So that's what it looks like when you call another one of your progs. If it's one of your progs, you put an at the start of it. If it doesn't have the at, it reads that as one of the built-in hard-coded progs. So I suppose let's just look at some more examples. I am going to show you, I've got a series of interesting progs written down that we're going to go through and explain some of the concepts. But before we do, you can get help on a lot of this stuff in the following ways. So if you do prog help types, it shows you all of the types that variables can be. So you got, accents, banks, crimes, characters, etc. There's a few ones that it probably makes sense to mention explicitly. A tune is either a character or a jargon. So a tune is the things that are in common between a character that is in progress or an NPC template to make a character and a character. So it has things like, name, race, culture, height, etc. Another one that is common is collection. Collection item is pretty much anything in here that isn't a collection. It's anything that can go into a collection, basically. So sometimes if you see something that says collection item, it basically means it can be almost any of those things. Similarly, magic resource haver can be a character, an item, or a room. Other ones like perceivable can be characters or items. There's a few that are these come from things that are happening in the engine, but they're sort of combined types. But anyway, that's the list of the types. And if you wanted to get help on a particular type, so let's go and look at what can we look at? Let's look at character, because that's quite a common one. These are all the properties that are on the character. So these are things that you can access in your prog. Characters have an ID number. They have names. There's a whole bunch of different name formats. Now, I've gradually been adding the help to lots of different types. I obviously haven't done it for characters, so this might have been a poor choice, but it does allow me to show a few things. You've got collections of things. So collections, you might think of them like a list or array from other programming languages. They're basically just a bunch of the thing that they are a collection of. So effects on the character is a collection of effects. So it's all of the effects that currently apply to the character. If you do inventory, it's a collection of items. So you can do things with the whole collection. There's also dictionaries and collection dictionaries. We're going to talk about those later. Let's see if I can find a type where I have actually done the help on. There we go. So this is most of the recent stuff has the help. I'm gradually working through some of the older stuff. But you can see there's usually an explanation of what each of them means. So with crimes, for example, ID of the crime, name of the law. You can refer to the law that the crime is against, the legal authority it belongs to, blah, blah, blah. So that's one part of the help, looking at the types. We've also got, I'm going to come back to functions later because it's a very long list. But we've got collections, which, as it explains here, are collection variables. So we talked about collections before. If you have a collection variable, you can run these functions on the collection and they do something. So for example, if you had, as it says here, a number collection that's called Fibonacci, and it has the Fibonacci numbers in it, you could do the sum of the numbers. This is a variable name, and then this is something that you do on each item in the list. So if we wanted to look at sum, so it says it runs the inner function, which returns a number, as it does there, over all elements of the collection, and then returns a sum of the results, and it returns 0 if the collection's empty. And it gives you an example of a common way that you'll use that when the collection is numbers. Collection functions are similar to link extensions in C#. If any of you are familiar with the language, there's a reason that I made them, because I'm familiar with working like this in C#. But an example of one that you might use is where. So say you had a collection and you run where on it. X is each item in the collection, and then you've got a Boolean function here, x.age is greater than or equal to 21. That would take a collection of characters and it would return you a new collection that has just the characters who are over 21 years or older. So when you think about how you would do that in say the RPI engine's progs, you would have to declare a separate variable. I don't even know if they have a concept of collections there, but you would have to iterate through the list in some sort of loop, check whether your thing applies, pass it out. This allows you to do it just very succinctly. Behind the scenes, that's what it's doing, but you don't have to write as much code to do it. Collection variables are very useful, and to give you some examples of how they're used in the real world, let's look at 141. So this is a prog that is used in jargon. So this is an example of a real prog. We're on the demo MUD here, so this is one that you will all have. This is something that you will probably need to go in and set up for character creation. This prog is referred to in the character creation definition. So the character creation definition has a requirement to have a prog that tells the engine what knowledges a character gets for free. So this particular prog takes a character, and it's a tune. So this can be a character or a character in progress, as we talked about. And it returns a collection of knowledges. So all of the knowledges that are in the collection get added to the character. So what it's done here is it's declared a variable, var knowledges. It's declared it as a knowledge collection, which, as you can see, matches the return type. And then at the bottom, it's returning that knowledges variable. So in between, anything you add to that collection will go into that and be returned. But I've got it all commented out because obviously I don't know what you're going to do with your MUD, but some real examples that that I think you should use, as it says here, surgical procedures, which we'll cover in a future video, are controlled by having knowledges. So in LabMUD, for example, if you have the surgery skill, it adds a knowledge that lets you do surgery. This is also a good example of an if statement, but I use an any. So basically, to tie it back into the collection extension stuff, we've got the character. We're looking at the character skills. Character.skills returns a collection of skills. We're doing the any on that list. And for each item in the list, we're looking at a variable x as the item in that list. So x is the skill at each item in the list. We're looking at the name of the skill, and we're seeing whether the name of the skill is surgery. And any will return true if any of the items in the list are true. So it's basically saying if any of their skills are called surgery, do this. And what we're going to do is we're going to add an item to the knowledges variable. And that's the knowledge. This form here, to knowledge and then either a text or a number, is the common way that you look stuff up from the game world. There's versions for virtually everything: to character, to item, to room, to knowledge, to skill, etc. We'll cover how to find that out in a second. Similarly, literature is done through knowledges. So if the character is literate, and you can have different ways of determining whether your character is literate. Like if you were doing a modern or futuristic MUD, you probably want to assume everybody's literate unless they have a flaw, which is how it's done in LabMUD. In a pre-modern game, you might require them to take a specific skill or something like that to indicate that they're literate. But basically, this one here is going, if they're literate, and they have the English skill, and you could have a big list of languages that give it, give them the Latin script, the script that we write English in. And you can add anything else. So this is a real tangible example of a prog that you will all need to edit at some point. You can uncomment some of this stuff and use it as inspiration, or you can go in a totally different direction. That's part of the beauty of it being progs, is that, you just point to this prog and you can do whatever on earth you can conceive of inside this. If you have a particular design, if you want knowledges to be based on classes, if you want knowledges to be randomized based on a dice roll or something, you can do that too. So these are all things that you can do. Another collection extension example, before we move on from that, prog 32 is legal casts jus romana criminal. So this is used in the enforcement code to work out if somebody is counted as a criminal. In the enforcement system, anybody can commit violence against a criminal, the way that it's set up if you set up the enforcement. So basically, a criminal is someone who is currently wanted for a violent crime for which they can be arrested. So, if somebody murders somebody and they're wanted for murder, or they're trying to, or they're trying to murder somebody and they're wanted for attempted murder or something, for example, it's not a crime for the person to fight back because that person would count as a criminal. And that's what you want. So this, which legal class they belong to is determined by progs, and this prog, which is set up automatically by the seeder, is providing the logic. So what it's doing is it's looking at the known crimes of a character in a particular legal authority. In that particular case, that is the jus romana. So it's looking at what crimes they've committed against Rome, basically. And of those crimes, if any of them are crimes that permit them to be killed, or crimes that permit them to be arrested, then they count as a criminal. If they don't have any crimes, so if that list is empty or none of their crimes are killable or arrestable, then they don't count as a criminal and they'll count as some other legal class. So that's collection extension functions. The next thing that we will talk about in the list is statements. So again, going back to the prog help statements. Statements are basically the boilerplate code. Things like return, things like var, things like where were some previous prog examples? Anyway, they're the boilerplate statements, and here's a list of them. Some of them are single items, like add item. That's just one line. It does everything that's on the line, and that's all it does. And some of them are block statements, like if. Once you have an if statement, everything that follows it until it finds an else or an end is part of a block that the if statement does. So I don't use curly braces or anything like that in this language, so it's all based on where the block ends. You can get a help on an individual statement type with prog help statement. So as it says, the if statement is used to do different code actions depending on some condition. It takes a Boolean function that determines whether the main branch executes or not. An if statement block is ended by either an else statement or an end if statement. Everything between the if and the first of these two is the main branch. Else is optional. So you've got if some condition, do this stuff. If that's false, do this stuff. And then the end. And you can skip this bit. So you can just have if it's true, do this. Otherwise, do nothing. Makes sense, hopefully. The coloration in these help files is from an earlier iteration of the way the color looks. I do need to go through and update those to the current coloration patterns, but it's not terribly important, so you'll just have to bear with me. But going back to the list of statements, you'll notice that there's a few different loop types: for each, while. They work similarly to what you might expect if you're familiar with other programming languages. For each is similar to the for each statement in C# in that you pass it a collection. So it says here, for each, it declares a variable, and you pass it in a collection, and then it loops through every item in that collection, sets each item in the collection to the variable name on each iteration, and then you can do something. So here's an example. Let's say you had a list of potential targets. This is a list of or a collection of characters. So you're cycling through the list. Each time you're cycling through the list, one of the characters from the list is victim. I'm assuming you already have a character. This is probably like an NPC AI routine or something like that. If the NPC AI will attack the victim, you've got some other prog here that's doing the logic of that. Then attack them and break out of the loop. Stop looping. Otherwise, it'll keep looping and it'll check everybody to make sure that it'll attack them. So, for example, that's how some of the NPC AI works in LabMUD. So if I find, let's see, will Antbot attack? So this would be an example of the like this will attack victim type implementation. For Antbots in LabMUD, it's got a character and a target character being passed in as parameters, which is similar to the character and victim here. So if it's not a human, don't attack it. If for whatever reason the target is not in the dread zone, don't attack it. Otherwise, do attack it. So that's the Antbot logic. Let's see. Do I have any ones where it will? Probably not. Anyway, for each is useful. I tend to use for each as my main looping structure. You may use different. I realized I've never used a while in any of the logic I've done. I don't know whether that just doesn't track very well to what we do here in progs, but beats me. So you've got for each while and for. The for loop is slightly different to like the way that C# does it. It has an iterator that starts at 1 and goes through to the number that you specify. I haven't had to use a for loop in the time that I've been doing this. Like I said, I mostly seem to use for each. Let's see some other examples of statements you might need to know about. Switches and if statements. So this is another example of a jargon-related prog. This is called takes in a character and tells the maximum height that a person can select. These values are in centimeters, which is what your engine will be set up as well if you've used the Cedar as the internal stuff. I do apologize. You're going to have to... the engine internally uses metric units, but it knows how to display everything as imperial. I should probably make some utility stuff for that, but it is generally pretty easy for you to use Google or something like that to just quickly find the equivalents. But so, in this case, as I've said here, you'll need to expand it as you add new playable races, because this is used for everything in character creation. So it comes in and it does a switch on the character's race. So it looks at the character's race, and then each of the cases is a different, it'll choose one of the cases that matches. So in this particular case, we've got one for humans, and we look at whether they're male or other. You probably need to make sure that if you've got non-binary, I generally assume that non-binary can select from the full list of things, but when it comes to things like physical characteristics like height and weight, I tend to put them on the female numbers, because most people who are non-binary are going to, if they were towards the extreme end of the male characteristics, they probably wouldn't be non-binary. One of the defining characteristics, I suppose, of masculine physical characteristics are that sexual dimorphism. So that's just an internal assumption that I've made. But if you have non-binary and you want to make some different assumption, you might need to make more than one if statement in here. But basically, in my default setup, human males can choose to be up to 6 foot 10.5 inches, and human females can choose to be up to 6 foot 8 inches. There's a corresponding minimum height. Nope, this one. So the minimum height is 4 foot 11 or 4 foot 9.5 inches for women. So that's if statements and switch statements. I'm going to show you one more example of a switch statement. This is a big one. So this is one of the ones that the Seeder sets up if you are using the Antiquity culture pack. So basically picks the Latin script knowledge. This is what controls whether somebody can choose to take it during character creation. So basically what it's doing is for each skill that they have, this prog is called against the character and each of the skills that they have, it tells them whether or not that skill enables them to pick this knowledge. So I've basically said any of the languages that are current or written in Latin will allow you to pick Latin, but I've got a big switch statement here, so it's switching on the name of the skill, and then there's all the cases for the different names, and they're true if it's any of those, and it's false if it doesn't hit any of those. If it goes through the switch and it doesn't find a case that matches, it either goes to a default label if there is one, or it just doesn't do anything. So hopefully you can see how you could change that around and use it in different scenarios. Let's see. You might occasionally need to use a prog, especially in NPC AI, to force somebody to do something. So an example is the door guard AI. So this is a prog that comes with the door guard AI that comes set up. These have to match what the AI expects. So the parameters are based on the AI. So it's got the guard, a variable called guard, which is the character who is the person who is the door guard. The other character is the person who's moving or who is... there's two ways to trigger door guards. You can do it with socials or you can do it with movement. So they're either moving towards an exit or they have nodded or waved or something like that. And the exit is the exit in question. The default setup assumes that the door guard has some kind of key and uses commands. So the force statement just forces them to execute a command. They're doing a little emote, and then they're unlocking the exit and opening the door. So that'll, if it's say the exit is to the north, the keyword will be north. So it'll be like unlock north, open north. Best keyword is how you find out how to do those commands and make sure you target the right person. So best keyword guard character will work out a unique way for that guard to refer to the character. So for example, if character is, a tall, dark-haired man with green eyes, and there's 4 people with the keyword man and 3 people with green, best keyword might be like 2.man.green, etc. But you're guaranteed, if you use best keyword, it'll work out what the best keyword is to use to target that person. So, best keyword you'll find using in these kind of scenarios. If you need to do a description of somebody, there's a function called how seen. Now is probably a good time to talk about those functions. So there's a whole bunch of built-in functions. As it warns here, there's a very long list of built-in functions. You saw how many times I had to page up to go through. Each line here is a potential function. Now, I only added the help system for functions a long time after I had started making the function, so I haven't actually gone back and added help files to everything in here yet. Generally, a pretty good indication of whether I've added a help file is whether it is in the unsorted category, which I think a lot of this stuff will be, or uncategorized. If it's uncategorized, I probably haven't got to writing a help file for it, but you can at least see what sort of parameters it takes. I can already hear some of you thinking, this is a lot of stuff to go through. how am I ever going to find what I actually need to find, through the MUD? Or what if I'm in an editor already and I'm typing up a prog? I need to reference all of this sort of stuff. Well, I have thought of that. So on the web page, under the FutureMUD public releases menu item, there's versions of some of these help files. So we actually already saw the types before. So there's all of the different types. If you click on these, they open up, and this is the same sort of output. In fact, it's the exact same output you would get from the MUD. So you can look at the types. You can look at the collection extension functions. We were talking about those. But you can also look at the prog functions. You can look at the list alphabetically, or you can look at it by category. So here's all those categories. So say you were looking to do something to do with rooms. Here's all of the room-related stuff. As you can see, it has like the name of the function, an example of how it's used, types and explanations for each of the parameters, and then usually an explanation of what it does. And you can see the return type as well. If you don't know what the function you're after, but you know the general theme, the by category reference is probably what you want. And if you know the function you're after and you just want to look it up, go to the alphabetical list and search for it. Like if you want to do send lock, for example, function. This is one you'll use a lot, by the way. Send lock sends a specified message to every perceiver in the room. So this is how you do echoes in progs, basically. So send lock, it returns a true or false value, which is whether it's sent the message or not. It's mostly going to be true. There are some reasons why it could be false. You don't need to worry about that too much, but functions generally do have a return type. The location is the room that you're sending it to, and the text is the echo. So it will send that text to everybody in the room. Now, with the echo ones, there's a whole bunch of different versions with different numbers of perceivables. So these are how you add people to use with the messaging system. I think I've covered this in some of the other videos, but when you write echoes, there's tokens, $1, $2, $3 to refer to each person in the echo, and you can do different things like get their pronouns by using the pound symbol or the ampersand symbol and various other things that this uses that same messaging system. But if you need to put them in the echo, and then it'll dynamically generate the description based on the viewer, what they can see. Probably the most common version of this one you'll use is this here, where you've got an echo and you've got somebody that is like the source of the echo, like somebody's doing something or whatever, and everybody else can see them, and $1 refers to their description, etc. You can also use the color tags. I think I mentioned those in the character creation video, but in case you need a refresher, that's these color tags here that you can see in the test ANSI. Hashtag 3 for, that's technically yellow, but I always think of it as brown, etc. You're familiar with these colors because they're the basic telnet colors. But anyway, I hardly recommend the website version of the function reference because I find it easier to navigate than the in-engine version. But if for whatever reason in-engine is what you prefer, you can do it in-engine. And if you want to look up a specific help for that function, you can. It shows you all the different versions of it, because this one you can do a version where you put in, I was talking about this earlier, there's versions for virtually everything. To accent, it returns an accent, you give it an ID, and it takes the ID number and loads the accent with that ID number, and it becomes an accent. So that's how you get an accent as such. There are there are lots of functions. I add new ones all the time. There's a few important categories to know about. The items one is how you do things like load and delete items. There's a whole bunch of different versions. How you put them in containers, flip tables, change materials, change morph timers, qualities, etc. Take them from people or containers. There's NPCs category for loading NPCs. You've got it's the null handling one, so some of these items can be null, which means that there's no value. So commonly, if you look something up and it doesn't exist, it might be null. If you have a value that could be null, you should use is null or if null to defend against that. In an if check. I think I had an example of that earlier with the isAdmin. So yeah, it isAdmin checks to see whether the character is null. If it's null, it just gracefully handles it and says, well, if there's no character, they're definitely not an admin. So this means that it can be used in scenarios where there might not be a character, like if something could be possibly checked internally in the engine, even without a character. Otherwise, if the character's not null, it goes and uses that inbuilt function, which we talked about. This would be on this list, probably character, I'm guessing. There we go, isAdmin. So tells you whether the person is an admin, and it can be a character, a Karjan, or this is a toon. It could be a character in creation, or an NPC template. They all count as toons. So, what's the next one we want to look at? I did have one that I wanted to do before we move on to some of the more complicated examples, just to show you a bit of clan-related stuff. So this prog is how, in the template, if you've installed the Roman templates, this is the prog that determines whether a person is a patrician and a male. It uses this in determining the appropriate title to give them, patricius versus patricia. So we talked about, actually, it also, that's why I remember now, had the logic as well. So we've got and, or, etc. There's and, or, and XOR, exclusive or, are the ones that you can use, and it's just the word. So I don't use, for example, the C like and or like that. I just use the words. So in this one, it's checking to see that the character is a male and that they're a clan member of a clan. This clan is the Roman city clan template, and that they hold a particular appointment within the clan, which is the patrician appointment. So why I told you that one is probably a common prog that you will write for your AIs and door guards and all that sort of stuff will check whether somebody's in a clan. This is the classic, the door guard lets people in who are members of the same clan, or the city guards attack people who are not members of the same clan. Like in Minus Morgul, if you approached the gate and you didn't have Minus Morgul city clanning, the guards would shoot at you. So that would be how you would do that. Something like is clan member. There are a couple of different clan related ones you can do. Must be on characters. Oop. Character. No, maybe I haven't actually done a let's see, prog help function is clan member. Yeah, it looks like these are ones that I haven't set up the help for yet, but there's a few different ways you can do it. whether they're just a member of the clan at all, whether they're a member of the clan of a certain minimum rank, whether they hold an appointment within a clan. You can check whether they're a particular pay grade if that's something you want to do. And that's also a is clan brother command, which is another one that you'll use. Clan brother just checks to see that they share any clans in common. If you use this version here, if they share any clans in common, then they are considered clan brothers. If you use this version, you're seeing if they're both members of this same clan. So it's a shortcut to doing it on both individually. And you can also supply a list of clans if you prefer. So that is the basics. Let's talk about some of the related topics. One of the related topics is something called the register. So the register is basically how you, as the builder, make custom properties on things. So this is basically you saying, hey, in my MUD, I really need to check. I've got a my MUD is set in, it's a historical Prince of Persia MUD, and I need to check whether a particular item is halal or haram because, my characters are followers of Islam. So on items, I need to be able to mark whether something is halal or haram. So I'm going to make a variable, a boolean, is halal, and it'll be on all game items. And this is how you do it. So register allows you to view what variables have been declared for different types and declare them. You can set default values for them. And then in your progs, you can retrieve a register variable on a particular thing. So you could, in your prog, if you had an item, you could do get register item is halal, and it would give you a true or false value. And set register would set the value on a particular item. You do need to registers help you avoid the scenario where in the RPI engine, if you have done any scripting in that, you had to find clever ways to store this kind of information. Like people would use empty ovals on items, or they would or often you would load an item and then use its ovals as like a quick and dirty way to store this stuff. The FutureMUD engine supports that natively, so I don't actually have all that good examples in the demo MUD, but I do have plenty of good examples in lab MUD. So let's go and have a look. Prog categories and see what categories we've got. Prog list can forage. Okay, so this prog is used to make sure that certain items in LabMUD can only be foraged once. We had a bunch of forageable items. These are the IDs of the forageable items. These are the locations in the game world in which they are canonically lost, I suppose. And basically, we only wanted them to be they're unique. Once found, they can't be found again. So we have a register item that's on shards, and you recall that shards are basically planets. So that's an easy way of sort of setting a global variable called special items found. It's a collection of numbers. So it's what items have been found, and it's basically the list of the forageable numbers. So when it's looking at a forageable and working out can they forage it, it's passing in the ID number of the forageable, and it looks up this list. Then it says if in the list that number is there, return false. You can't forage that. It's already been found. If it hasn't, check where the character currently is, and if they're in the right room, then yes, it can be foraged. And if not, then no, it can't be foraged. You see here also a default case on the switch, which I don't think we had an example of before. And then there's a corresponding prog on forage. So when the item is actually foraged, it gets the list of special items. It adds the item that was just foraged, and then it sets it back in the register. So it basically saves that that item was found. And it also sends a message to the admins that they found a special item. So yeah, this is an example of how you might use the register. The demo MUD won't really have much set up in the way of the register because it doesn't really need to for the basic stuff it comes with. It's more later stuff. So I'll use some examples from lab MUD. So if we show the variables that are on the shards, it's only that special item found. But what about if we look at characters? Character has a lot of stuff. At one stage, I was trying to make an arena system with progs, but I actually ended up not doing that. So those are kind of, I'm going to do it as a full-on coded system one day. Studying Spark, some of you might be familiar with that from LabMUD. When you eat the crystal, that gets changed to true, and that unlocks a project that you can do which checks against that variable. Has created a clan. It gets set to true once you create a clan as a player, so players can only create one clan unless an admin resets this for them. These things are used when you smoke cigarettes to see how long you're affected by nicotine or marijuana, etc. Running cooldown is used, but anyway, you can see what these things do, and if you wanted to add a new one, you could add a new one. Similarly to register, if you wanted to see what the actual values of these things are, there's an admin command that's useful in general, but it's also useful for this, called sniff. Sniff gives you a bunch of information about a character. That tells you a bunch of stuff up here, which doesn't really matter. But importantly, it tells you all the variables. So on me as my admin avatar, I can't study Spark. I probably haven't done any of that sort of stuff. You can also sniff here to see the room that you're currently in. So we had the video playing for the intro videos, which are themselves fairly interesting examples of progs. We might do one of those as an example later. So that's register variables. One of the examples we're going to use later also has register variables. Another thing that's important to know is hooks. So a hook is a way that connects events like NPC events and progs. And the NPC events are things that the AI uses, but also you can hook onto them and have things happen. So if we wanted to look at the possible AI events, there's a whole list of them. So these are things that the AI can react to. Like, for example, the character dropping an item. If the character drops an item, that fires an event that AI can latch onto. Some of the important ones, command input and self-command input, are how you do custom commands. Things like witnessing a social is how door guards and begin movement witness is the other one. So when they see people move or when someone does a social like nod to them, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. But you can use these to create manual AI basically. So what you do is you create a hook that matches one of these events and has a prog associated with it, and then you install the hook on something, and when that thing happens, it calls the prog. So you could have, I don't know, maybe you want to troll one of your other admin friends, and every time they enter the game, you want to send them a message. Well, you can make a prog that matches that event type, and then you can make a hook for that prog and install the hook on the person. And then every time they enter the game, it will fire the prog, and the prog could send them an echo or force them to do a silly dance or something like that. The way you make a prog that matches the event quite easily is what we were talking about before with the prog edit new event. So if you use that form and use an event, it'll set up all of the parameters correctly, the return type and the parameters, etc. So if we want to look at a specific event, what was that one we were talking about before? Character enters game. Fires once when a character enters the game for the first time. Takes a character, the parameter is called person. If you create a prog against that event, it'll automatically have that parameter in place. Some of the other things like character dropped item witness, they have more parameters, so it becomes more handy. So basically, dropped item witness is somebody else in your room dropped an item. That's the character who did the dropping, that's the item they dropped, and the witness is the person who witnessed it, which is probably the person the prog is executing on. So I add events all the time. They're how I do AI internally for the hard-coded stuff, but you can absolutely hook into them manually. So if you make the prog, then you make the hook for the prog, then you install the prog if you want to install it on a target, or you can add it as a default for all perceivers of a particular type. So if you wanted to say, well, I actually do have an example of that. So we're going to make one here, right? So we're going to make a prog edit new event, and the event is going to be self command input. So when a person enters a command, and we are going to call this do fuzzradar. And then we're going to set, if we just look at the one that was created there, you can see it's already set up all the parameters for us. So we don't need to set those, but we'll just set text and drop us into the editor. And we are going to have this prog, when it's done, it will send out an echo to the location, which includes language handling. To the character's location, here's the echo. The person shouts fuzzradar and sends a powerful shockwave of energy rushing out in a tight cone. The current language they're speaking, the current accent they're speaking, and the character. Oops, what did I do? Right, so I had forgotten that I have to escape those quotation marks when I enter text in a prog like that. Oops. Let's edit the text. There we go. So if we manually do this one here, do fuzzradar me, so you see it makes me do an echo. You shout fuzzradar and send an extra, Cool, right? We can do it manually. But what we can also do is we can now create a hook. So we're going to create a hook. We're going to call it fuzzradar. The prog is do fuzzradar self command input, and the command is going to be people, unsurprisingly, going fuzzradar. Cool. You can tell I had been playing around with this earlier. with a similar command. But anyway, what we can do now is we can manually install this hook. Hook install to on me. So at the moment, I type fuzz-radar. It's not a recognized command, right? But I can hook install me to. Now when I type fuzz-radar, I do that. So you can put, this is how you can make custom commands. You could do literally anything you want in here. You can have that be the entry point into entire systems. It's powerful once you really get your head around what you're doing there. But that's great. I've installed it on me. I can do this now. But what if I wanted everybody in the game to be able to do it? That's where I want the default hooks, right? So if I add a default for characters, and it's hook 2, and you have to supply a filter prog, we're going to do always true. But we could say, you know, only characters with a particular skill or something like that. But we're just going to say everybody can do it. All right, so there's a default hook for characters. It executes the fuzz-radar hook, and it has the always true filter prog. That's all as we expected. The default hooks don't get checked until the MUD is rebooted. So I'll just quickly do that. I actually know what I'll do is I'll load an NPC to show that that can be the case. So here we go. Newly loaded man into the game. Let's make him do fuzz-radar. And there you go. You can see that it executed the prog and we got the other side of the echo. You can remove it later if that's what you want to do. I've got examples of hooks in LabMUD as well. The hooks on command input rather than self-command input are how I did the guest lounge equipment loading stuff. So for example, if you load melee weapons, here's the prog. It loads a bunch of items and puts them in the guest room where the character is and then sends them an echo. It's hooked to command input, and then I have installed that command on the room where it does it. If I installed that hook on another room, it would add that same functionality to that room. So you can use these hooks. You don't need to make a new hook every time you do the same thing on a different room. So I don't know, you could have something that has a lot of different branches. You know, you've got a telegraph house system and you want all of the telegraph locations to have a prog. You can do that with command input. You can also install command input on items and characters, and that will mean that other people can use that command around the item or the character. So you could make a dial telephone that somebody can do a command with, or you could make a character that has a command that lets you, you know, poke them or something like that. The only other hook worth mentioning in the example is that I've done this one with a 5-second tick. So the 5-second tick is, as it sounds, something that happens every 5 seconds. And I wanted to basically, this is the heartbeat of the dread zone. This is the whole dread zone system runs off this. It calls into all the other functions that do all of the logic of the dread zone from this, and I want it to every 5 seconds be checking these things. I have this hook that runs every 5 seconds that goes against a character, and I have it installed on a little Roomba in an out of character location. The dread zone controller Roomba, he has that hook installed on him. Every 5 seconds it runs that prog. It has nothing to do with him. I just needed to install it on something. But that's kind of how I do the heartbeat of the dread zone. It's how you could do similar things. It's one of the ways in which you could do echoes on a location as well. But we're going to talk about one of the other ways now. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about hooks. The other thing you want to know about is schedules. This is all of the schedules in LabMUD. So basically, schedules run a prog every certain interval based on in-game time. So in the lab, The lab lights turn on and off at particular times every day. They turn on at 6 a.m., they turn off at 10 p.m. every day at this time. Once this fires, it will update to the next day. And as you can see, here's the prog that does it. It looks for the zone. It looks for all of the items in all of the rooms that have that particular proto, which is the light item, and it sets them to not lit as an off. If I haven't turned Anna off, I have that Anna override for when we're doing events and stuff like that. So if Anna shouldn't be announcing stuff because the lab's under attack or whatever, we just turn Anna off, and then it doesn't do all of these echoes. But otherwise, it picks a random echo, switches on a random number there, and does an echo. Similarly, this is how I do the echoes in the general area. Switches on a random number, picks an echo, and sends it to everybody in the zone. How you interact with the schedules is using the schedule command. So you can add schedules. They run a prog on an interval, optionally with a reference time, and then you can remove them. The reference times can be based on these things, minutes, hours, days, weekdays. So you could have something happen every Tuesday, for example, at the same time. It says the in-game time periods. If you want to do something that's based on real time, that's where you need to do hooks. There's a 5-second, 10-second, 30-second, minute, and hour hook, and then you just have to figure out how to do it on the frequency that you want to do it on real time on those. So scheduling, not all that surprising. But I have an example that I want to run through. I've posted this example in LabMUD a while ago, but I have a functioning subway system. So we're here in this forum here, and we have a subway. If we go into the subway, it's just a subway station, right? Just we can come in and out. Nothing much here at the moment, but there is a train that's running around, and it's actually running around based on a prog or a series of progs. And that's earlier when we were looking at the subway heartbeat wrapper. Now with the scheduler can only schedule stuff that doesn't take any parameters or takes any parameters. So that's why I need this wrapper function. It runs this function, and then this knows how to kick it off. So the schedules on the demo MUD have the subway wrapper running every 10 minutes. And then the subway wrapper is calling the heartbeat and starting it off. And the heartbeat then calls itself on a timer. I'll show you how that's done. Whoops. Show prog. Subway heartbeat. Now, this is a complicated one, but it's got lots of comments. So it takes that step. It starts off at 1. So we start by working out where we currently are at as a station. We have 3 stations, 1, 2, and 3. The first, we look at, we're using a register variable on the zone to store where we're currently at. This is a little thing. If it's run the first time, it won't have set the station number, so it just sets one. So we advance. We update the register variable. This is the train carriage room, room 17. Then it's got a bunch of other variables that it's going to be looking at. What's the station room? What's the name of the current stop and the next stop? So depending on which station we're at, the current location is these rooms, and the guest lounge station, void station, forum station, etc. We're storing a language and an accent because we're going to be using them in the echoes, and we don't want to have to look them up every time. The delay time is how long it's going to be between each of the steps. And then we're switching the steps, and it goes through a series of steps that announces that the next train to arrive on the platform will be blah, and here's the next stop. Inside the train, it says the train is now arriving at. It echoes that the train's pulling in. Then it's using overlays. This is one way you can do this sort of public transit stuff. I talk about this on, if you want more detailed explanation of this, it's on the Discord. But basically it uses overlays. It swaps this in to reset everything to base, works out which station you're at and swaps in the overlay to have the correct exit from the station to the train, waits 45 seconds, then tells you that you're going to depart. Now, here we go. So the next train to arrive on the platform is the all-station service on the City Loop. The next stop will be Guest Lounge Station. Please stand back for your safety. Once it's done all this, it's done the echoes and it's got the delay time, it actually calls itself. Delay prog is a statement that calls another prog. In this case, it's calling itself with a certain delay time. These are in milliseconds, so that's 15 seconds, etc. And it's incrementing the step by 1. And that's only if the step is less than 6. So it calls itself 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it stops. And then it waits. And so now the train is pulled in. You'll notice we've now got an enter train. So we can enter the train. And we're on site. We're in the train now, inside the subway carriage. In a few moments, it'll echo that it's leaving soon. There we go. Train will shortly depart. I think it waits about. Oh, there we go. Oh no, it's still there. We only expect the one exit here. Should be 15 seconds. So the doors are closing. Come on, doors. Let's close. There we go. Doors of the train shut. The exit's gone. So we're inside the subway carriage. It's now rattling off. It'll take a minute or two, then it'll go through the same sequence at the next station, and it will switch in all of the profiles. And this is a very simple way. It's not a super complicated prog when you really looked at it. What are we looking at here? 89 lines. It's fairly straightforward. You could add extra stops. You could change the echoes around. You could do whatever you want with these, but it just goes to show you you can set up some very complicated systems quite easily. Other examples from LabMUD of some systems that I've done, the whole dread zone, which I've documented on Discord if you're ever interested, but dread zone is the most complicated system I've ever built with progs, but it's all controlled by progs. Tick, is it? Yeah. And then we can do things like dread zone check robots. You know, make sure that there's a Roomba wandering around. If the dread zone's active, or if it's not active, spawn ant bots. You know, kill robots that are in the maintenance bays while it's not active and get rid of their corpses. If there are no kill bots and the zone is clear, reset the wave and start a new wave. So there we've come to the guest lounge via the train. And we can leave, and here we are in the guest lounge. So anyway, it's pretty cool. But you can do some very complicated stuff. I have all of the Dread Zone stuff up on the Discord if you want to look at it. Another example is the dormitories. Prog categories. Dormitories. So it's just a series of progs. There's a list and a claim one that are basically commands that are done outside. If you do show prog 97, this is where you look at the display panel and it just uses, it looks in the exits that are in the destination. It looks for a lock for the little safe is what it's storing the information on. It gets items from its register, who owns the safe, and it displays it in a list, and you can claim it. And then where it uses door guard logic, there's actually invisible Roombas. Let's see. Yeah, so there's whiz and viz Roombas that you guys can't see that open and close the doors as you start walking towards them, and they use progs to check that you are the owner of the safe and all that sort of stuff. I think I've also got that as an example on Discord, but for doing simple systems like that, the prog system is really good. So anyway, that's really all of the core stuff. There's lots more nuance to it. Hopefully, this has whetted your appetite. I gladly will talk about progging with anybody on Discord. Thank you very much for listening to me, and good luck.